Hello, I'm Rick Tuttle, and it's my privilege today to be the interviewer of the Captain's Table. Tom Kaptain, who is the producer of this show, had an idea some time ago to borrow from a tradition in the English Navy, which is where at the captain's table on a vessel on the high seas, the captain would invite some chosen people to join him at the table for a repast and some libations, and would then select a member of the audience around the table who'd done some interesting things in his or her life to be interviewed. And so, for some time now, for a year or so, there have been interviews at the captain's table. Tonight, we have the privilege of an interview that I will be conducting with Mr. Herb Wesson, who has served as council president of the Los Angeles City Council, or to put it in the appropriate terms, he's been president of the Los Angeles City Council, which is the second largest city in the United States of America, and served in that capacity as council president for 8 years, from 2012 to 2020, but also, and unique as far as I know, in California and Los Angeles politics, served as the Speaker of the California State Assembly from 2002 until 2004. It's a great privilege to have Mr. Wesson here with us. And Mr. Wesson, let me begin by saying it is afternoon here in Los Angeles. Good afternoon, sir.
Well, good afternoon to you, my friend Rick. And it is an honor to be at the captain's table. And I do have my libation, which is an unsweetened black iced tea. So I come prepared.
You and I, we get hold of some mutual friends, Ed Johnson, who Ed and I go back. He worked for you for many years.
Yes, he did. He's I'll just say this. The people that worked for me, Rick, I never considered them staff. They were always an extension of the family. We were a team. So, Ed, we worked together on the same team. Ed was an offensive guard, and I was the quarterback. But we were teammates.
He is a fine man, a
yes,
good
he
friend.
Is.
And I met Mr. Johnson. We'll get back to Mr. Wesson, Council President Wesson, in a moment. But Ed Johnson, I met him when he worked for the great George Brown, Congressman George E. Brown Jr.
Oh, you met him in the very beginning. Geez, I did not know that.
But I got to be careful. We could swerve off and Lord knows who. But here's let me say a little bit more about Captain's Table. It's such a pleasure, such an honor to have Mr. Wesson with us. I'll tell the audience right now, I may skip back and forth between calling you Mr. Speaker, Mr. Council President, and Council Member, because you've graced us with your leadership and uniquely. Again, I'll go back to what I said. I'm perfectly aware of the fact that Mr. Villaraigosa served as the Speaker of the Assembly, and a good friend here at this table, I think, of both of us. And he also went on and came back, and then he took the job later after he lost the first time, got elected council, and came on over and got himself elected mayor. And that's all fine. I'll have a point I'm about to make on all this in a minute, but let me go on with a few more general things. I want to start with a disclaimer. Again, to reintroduce myself by name, I'm Rick Tuttle. I myself have been in the world of elected life. I was 2 terms on the Los Angeles Community College Board of Trustees. For 4 terms, 16 years, I served as Los Angeles City Comptroller. The relevance of that is we were neighbors when Mr. Wesson was chief of staff to Mr. Holden, who had made one of the great political upsets of all time, winning that council seat upon Dave Cunningham's departure. And Mr. Wesson, chief of staff, our offices, the side door, the front door of my office, and the door of Mr. Wesson, of Mr. Holden's office, I think there are 2 of them, were very near each other in the hallway. And you were a cigarette buddy of a blessed memory, my wife, Buff Singer, my beloved father-in-law, Mr. Bernard Singer. He would go out on the south steps of City Hall. And you would
He
be
and I,
2 or 3 others. And he so looked forward to that. He looked forward to spending some time with you. And you guys kind of timed it. We'll see each other at 2 o'clock or something, and you go out.
well, just let me jump in. That was back in the days when they actually had ashtrays constructed into the building. You know, you you would never see that today. And he and I would, when he was there, we'd probably see each other at least twice, sometimes 3 times. But you should know I quit smoking in February. Only took 100 years.
You and I, in reading and preparing for this, I came to learn of not only the influence of your mother, who moved out to California from Cleveland, Ohio, where you grew up, but your dad, who died young, but he also was a strong influence. My father, Fred Tuttle, he limited his injunctions and requests to his eldest son. And he said, and there were 2 things. I'll leave you to guess the second one. The first thing he said, Rick or Ricky, he said, please never smoke. And so I never got started. let me go to my disclaimers. So
Yeah.
we're friends. We're well acquainted. I have. It's been my privilege to back you in some of your races. I've been on different sides on some things here and there. I get around to that as we go through this discussion.
No, I'm going to jump in. I don't think you've ever been opposite me. Now, we may have, it may have been some ballot initiatives, but you have always been my friend and supportive of me.
I've always been, when you're personally on the move, been there.
Yes, you have.
There have been times where I've, for example, backed some folks that you have not backed, and propositions, and I caused all kinds of trouble at the county committee. I was up in the back bench on this whole thing about the Civilian Review Board of the LAPD, and my friends at the council was empty that day. You had everybody on the council floor. I'm sitting up in the back. I had a lot of friends in the room, and I realized that the chair of the meeting, and I've chaired a few meetings myself. I know how this is done. He kind of quickly shut down the ACLU speaker. Well, that didn't shut me down. Not me in the back. I raised all kinds of heck, and the county party, as I recall, was on the other side of Mr. Wesson's move on that. But that's another story. Now, here's the disclaimer. I want to mention this, and I may, on the wrap up, mention it again or here and there. On the other hand, I have an assignment, and that is for the audience. I'm not pretending to be a member of the Fourth Estate or the press, but I want to try to be in a mode with this disclaimer that we're well acquainted and good friends to, on the other hand, carry on the assignment the way a good journalist would. Or, to put it slightly differently, and here's something I do know a lot about, because my field of study at UCLA was in history, as a modern historian. In other words, we're getting to the point now where the study of what happened, for example, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and into the 90s, and then roll into the first decade of this century, this is the sort of thing that in a good history class that people will begin to prepare, and they may very well turn to this interview, the one that we had, the captain's table with Mayor, former Speaker Willie Brown.
Yeah.
With Councilman Bob Blumenfield, who I understand was on earlier. I did one earlier in a part of my life that people found interesting.
Bob's another good man.
So we'll do that. And let me so with that, let me start biographically by I'm going to just excerpt from your biography, Mr. President, and then I'm going to come to some questions. Herman J., known as Herb Wesson Jr., was born November 11th, 1951. He's an American political figure who served as council member representing the 10th District of Los Angeles for 3 terms between 2005 and 2020, and again, briefly on appointed basis, March 22 until August 25th of 2022. This is the whole matter with Mr. Mark Ridley Thomas's situation. And
yes.
I probably won't dive into that. It's a live court case on appeal, so I'll probably stay away from much of that. Though I'm all involved on this thing.
Well, see, the only thing I'll say about that is, and I won't talk about guilt, innocence, this, that, the other. What was important to me was that the people of the 10th district had somebody there to represent them. And that's why I decided to, when I was asked, that's why I accepted it. And that's just what I hope happens for people in any district, because when they don't have representation, they wind up losing things, Rick. That's the reality.
Well said. I took a pretty high profile position opposing the council's decision in the first place to remove him and argue. I happened to be deeply involved in the charter changes that took place. And this charter was being cited.
Yeah.
Very big argument that what was alleged to have taken place that shouldn't have taken place was over in the county, not when he was in city official. And anyway, I weighed into that as well. And we my comment earlier, we may wind up coming back to that topic. Mr. Wesson, I'm going to go ahead with the biography. He received his undergraduate degree from Lincoln University. Let me just read this for a minute because I want to talk a little bit about Lincoln. I know something about Lincoln University. He received his, meaning Council President Wesson, received his undergraduate degree in history from Lincoln University. And in 1999, he initiated as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Mr. Wesson was the chief of staff to former Los Angeles City Council member Nate Holden, and in the same position for former Los Angeles Supervisor Yvonne, I include the word Brathwaite, Yvonne Burke. After being termed out of the assembly, became her senior advisor and special assistant. And then you went on very shortly thereafter, upon Martin Ludlow's departure, to be elected and reelected again to the 10th Council District. The old Tom Bradley seat is what it is.
Yes.
Los Angeles, it's a leadership seat of the Los Angeles City Council. He served as Speaker of the California State Assembly from February of 2002 until February of 2004. In those days, the Assembly had only 3 terms, 6-year terms. That's been a change since.
Thank God.
And then a few years later, served as president of the Los Angeles City Council from January of 2012 to January of 2020. Let me, before we go on by the way, Mr. Wesson, I've been asked to take a couple of commercial breaks and won't be long, but
I'm in your hands.
Before we get to that, let me also thank Mr. Tom Kaptain, who's the producer of this, and Tom is well known as a political consultant and slates and mailing. He's also shares with me a great interest in sports. He claims to know a little something. Well, he knows things. He knows what he knows, but he doesn't know the history of some of these things, which I happen to know since I'm older man than he is. And also Mr. Michael Parnell, who is our editor and helping us put on this show today. But I will be on a search on behalf of our audience. Mr. Wesson, I'm speaking to you in the third person at the moment, sir. Mr. Wesson, serving in the assembly as speaker, is unique in as much as he then came over to the Los Angeles City Council and served for 8 years as president of the council. Now, what each of these, Mr. Villaraigosa did serve 2 years as speaker, and then went over and got himself on the council after one try, became mayor of Los Angeles. But what Mr. Wesson has done, tremendously, and is now running for governor. And by the way, he's burdened with my support in this effort. He's with Rebecca's blessing, I set a contribution right at the beginning. But in any event, what's interesting to me, even though we're acquainted, Mr. Wesson, is you have twice been chosen and then chosen again and again by your peers. These are your colleagues. It's 41 votes in the assembly. It is 8 votes out of 15 in the council, and how that gets put together, but also the qualities that draw people to you. That's going to be the subtext. I'm not going to keep talking about it, but I want you to understand, my friend, that this is going to be the subtext of some of my questions. I'm now going to take a short break, and we'll be back in a few seconds. Thank you. And we're back. This is Rick Tuttle. It's my privilege to be hosting the Captain's Table. And we're here today with former Los Angeles City Council President, former Speaker of the State Assembly, Mr. Herb Wesson. And as I said just before the break, we'll be discussing Mr. Wesson's biography. I know I read it. I just got through reading what's in print. And so I've been around in many places. But I want to probe a little bit more, and I want to take us back to Cleveland when you're growing up. And my first question is, as a person growing up, Mr. Wesson, everyone writes about this. You know, you're a powerhouse, you're 5 feet 5 inches tall, and XYZ. Were you always fair among your peer group growing up as a youngster in Cleveland? I understand, pretty tough neighborhood. Were you always fairly short and the little guy?
I was,
You were taller and relative to your peers.
I have always been the short guy. I think when my younger brother was born, he probably was born taller than me. So I have always been the short guy. So I've been dealing with that forever.
Well, now that gets us started. And as I understand, your father was a auto worker in Cleveland, and
Yes, he worked at Chevrolet.
was he UAW?
Yes, he was yeah, I come from a union household. He was like I said, Chevrolet. It seemed like my mother always had decent jobs. So once with General Electric, she worked for the Cleveland Police Department, clerical, but she was always represented. So we come from union stock.
I know a little bit about Cleveland, and that is, oh, by the way, Mr. Wesson, you're in the presence right now with Rick Tuttle of a devoted from the old days with Marianne Motley, Len
Oh,
Ford,
oh my God.
Graham,
That
and
one of the
no, no, I'm not
what?
done. And later, Mr. Jim Brown. I mean, you're here, you're in serious, serious Cleveland Brown country here. I mean, and I understand you're a Browns fan, Cleveland Browns fan.
Huge. In fact, I just bought some. It's just not. I just can't grab it. But I just bought some Cleveland Brown socks the other
I'll tell
the
you a
other
story.
day.
I'll
In
tell you a
fact,
story where
I was at the Orange County Fair, and my daughter-in-law bought me a pair of Cleveland Brown socks. Yes.
I know I'm no, I know I'm talking about things before you became a fan in terms of the teams. And then later, of course, you were very much a fan when the great Jim Brown was playing. Remember, let's go over the data. Data matters. I happen to care about data. 5 yards a carry average at a career. And
Something else.
and he could break. It's hard to do with all those fast defensive backs. He could break an 80-yard touchdown run. Saw him do it.
And
He could break.
I've seen it every week. You know what? I'll tell you this. When he played for the Cleveland Browns, he owned a light purple, we called it a drop top, which is actually a convertible. But he owned a light purple convertible Cadillac. He lived 2 blocks away from my grandmother, and my cousins and I would, from time to time, go and just kind of stand not in front of his house, but across the street and wait for hours. And out of all of those times, one time he did come home. I don't know if he came home or left, but he waved at us and made our day.
Well, I think we both agree he was a man among men.
Yep, true that.
He could go and to corrections institutions. He could walk in and dialogue with them. He was held enormous. Jim Brown held enormous respect, and had whatever is that quality, which is part of the quality I'm talking about with Mr. Wesson, which is a leadership quality. Part of
Well,
it,
I don't know all about that about myself, but
it's all very fine.
I
But
I do know I had an opportunity, Rick, when I was working for Councilman Holden to actually meet Jim Brown, have conversations with him. We donated a check, and I had the privilege of delivering the check to his home as he was holding court over 20, 30 guys. So, and my biggest claim to fame is my wife and I were on a plane going to Las Vegas. And as the plane was about to, everybody was deplaning, this deep voice says, Herb Wesson, is that you? And we turned around, and my wife was like, Jim Brown knows your name.
well, I have known you for a long time, sir, and I like you, and I certainly admire you. But I've never been more impressed than I am at this moment when you just said that. I was on a plane and I looked over and I was sitting right next to him. So you don't trap a person on a plane. We were on our way to Sacramento, so I wait until the last 10. I don't want to make him feel trapped in a conversation. But I leaned over to him and I said, Mr. Brown, I knew who he was, and he leaned over and said, let me see if I have the story straight. I said, you came out of Manhasset High School and you weren't going to go to Syracuse. You were going to go to Plattsburgh State University of New York up at Plattsburgh, New York. It's up near Montreal because you were a lacrosse guy and you had a lady friend up there.
A great lacrosse guy.
And I said unto him, I said, do I have the story straight that the coach, Ben Schwartzwalder at Syracuse, saw to it this young lady was quickly admitted to Syracuse University? You came with her and said, you got that right. Let me go back to you, though.
Yes.
Even though this is part of who we are, because part of who you are is a devoted and loyal sports fan. There's some Rams have gone through the thin and the thick of life.
Yes.
And who we identify with says something. But as I understand it, when you grew up in the neighborhood, it's a pretty tough neighborhood. As a
Tough
defense,
enough.
as a defense matter, you gathered some young people together to form a counter group to be able
Well,
so you weren't isolated. Can you tell us
now
about
this is, I think, I guess, I've always had difficulty in, patting myself on the back, but I would have to say this is when I really knew that I had some leadership skills and how important it was to use the gifts that were given to you by God. So my parents had just bought this new home in this new area, and it was tough enough. But I don't want people to think that I grew up in a neighborhood where there were gunshots no, but there were some. We were surrounded by two or three different young gangs. So when folk in my neighborhood would walk to school, and this was junior high school, and back then junior high school was 7th grade through 9th grade. And you'd be walking, and I'd look up and I'd see a guy running his butt off, and he'd have 3, 4 guys behind him. And I'd say, damn. And then maybe one day they'd be chasing me and I'd be running. And so I'll never forget, it was one Saturday, I invited the guys over to my house to read comic books in the garage. And this was right around the time school was going to start. And we had a conversation. No, I was about 12, maybe.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, maybe I was 12 years old. I was in the 7th grade.
All right.
Okay, so what I recommended, I said, look, we all live within a 5-6 street radius. Why don't my cousins who lived 5 blocks away. I said, why don't you guys, you walk over to Kevin's house and you pick Kevin up. And then you guys go up the street and you pick up Daryl. Anyway, by the time, and so they all, this made, and I said, we will all walk to school together. So by the time they got to my house, we were 9 or 10 guys strong. And by the time we were going to leave our little area, we were 12 or 13 guys strong. And once we started that, no one ever messed with us. And then also, what we were able to do is if one guy had a lady friend, we would allow them to walk behind us or in front of us. Thus, the guy with the lady friend did not have to worry about being embarrassed in front of a young lady he was trying to impress. So I think that's when it began. And then what I started to do was I started organizing sporting events where my group, now we got our butts kicked like in every sport, but we played. And that gave us an opportunity to get the guys from, the other areas. I remember the Joanne Park area in particular. But so we all bonded. And so for the next few years, we did not have problems. So that's one of my proudest moments. And by the last year of junior high, we could go to school, just one guy, 2 guys, no problem.
Upon graduating high school, you attended and were admitted to and attended Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania.
36 miles from Philadelphia.
And I happen to be very familiar with Lincoln University
Get
because
out.
Horace Mann Bond, the great Horace Mann Bond, was president of Lincoln University for about 12 years, for about approximately 1945 to 1957. I'm 84 years old. I came out of high school in 1957. And so a lot of things happened to happen that year. And one of them is for me, I came out of high school. But he was a very distinguished scholar and historian. And as we know, the father of Julian Bond, among another child as well, James, as I recall. And his brother, meaning Professor President Horace Mann Bond, was also a scholar, a professor at USC. You may know the name James Max Bond, who's done some serious work on the history and sociology of the Los Angeles community. And the Bond family, a very distinguished family, and of course at Lincoln, which is founded and before the Civil War in 1854, and many of our physicians and attorneys are graduates of Lincoln University. And you attended, and then as I understand the story, your father passed away and you left the university before you graduated, came back to help out your family. And
Sure.
and then came West. Can you fill us in on some of these details?
Well, let me just, where it relates to Lincoln University, just a little tidbit. When I was growing up in Cleveland, my family's a blue collar family. No one in my family ever went to college. So my family never really pushed it. Okay. My mother would, and I didn't pay any attention to my mother. We moved to Montclair, New Jersey. And it seemed like when I got there, everybody was talking about going to college. So I applied to all of these African American colleges. In fact, any college, I got rejected by every college. In fact, I remember one college sent my mother the tuition check back. That's just how bad my grades were. But there was a neighbor who was a ex-football player named McCray, who went to Lincoln University. and he gave me a letter of recommendation. And I'll never forget, it was a 4th of July weekend. My family was away. And when we came back on that Tuesday, there was a letter of acceptance to Lincoln University, basically telling me if I could be on campus in like 3 days and stay for 30 days in a program called Lift, then I would automatically be enrolled in that September. So that's what I did. I loved it. It's the first African American university that was given the authority to issue degrees.
That's right.
So there was a lot of history behind it. It was a lot of pride. It was at a time when, you know, blacks were transitioning from being called Negro and colored and whatever. So it was just a great, great time to go to college. But my dad got sick, and I did decide to come home because he got sick first. And the rest is kind of history. When he passed away, we had gone back to Cleveland, Ohio. And it's funny, it was my intention to go back to school immediately, but something is always something. That's why I tell the kids today, don't take a time out, don't take a break. The quickest way to graduate, you want to know a shortcut, do it in one freaking time. But because it took me 30 years or 20 years before I would ultimately graduate. But that's basically what happened. Before my father passed, he told me I should leave Ohio and try to find myself, find my, future. So I was determined to move to Atlanta or LA. And ultimately, I chose Atlanta, right? So I am preparing to go to Atlanta, and either there was a movie of the week or a commercial, and they had this woman riding on a horse like Lady Godiva saying, "Come to California." So I can't remember if it was a commercial or a movie, but I changed my mind. I changed my mind that night. Within a month, I was in Los Angeles, jumped in a cab, they take me to the beach, and sat there for like 3 hours looking for girls riding horses and never saw them. That is a true story.
Yeah, wait. You get your lovely wife, and I'll take Rebecca. We'll go down to the beach and start looking around. Maybe we'll find somebody ride back and forth on a horse. What month did you come out? Do you remember
It
the day?
was March. I'll never forget. It was March
March of 74.
1974.
Well, you came at a remarkable time. The Reverend James Lawson came the same year, about the same time. Reverend Lawson
I
came,
did not know that.
and he came out, and they arrived at a very interesting point because you were arriving. It was March. You're arriving within the first year of the Mayor Tom Bradley's administration, who was elected in '73. Dave Cunningham moving to take his seat was shortly thereafter. You also had working their way through, I'm getting on the political side of this now, working its way through the primaries, and that is the Secretary of State of California, who became governor, Jerry Brown, in a four or five way primary fight, and went on to become governor. And you had, in the middle of all that, you had the Watergate process taking place. As I understand the story, you had been inspired at Lincoln by
Ron Dellums.
Congressman Ron Dellums.
As you are aware, there are several African American or Black fraternities and sororities. So I am a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, the first African American fraternity. And when you all of the Greeks, as we were called, would get like a weekend where you would have to put on events for the rest of the school. And you usually have like a party and then you bring in a guest speaker and you have a church service and that. So I wanted to be on the committee that did the party, but I wound up being on the escort committee for this guy I had never heard of, who was a relatively newly elected congressperson. And I'm like, God, you know, why do I want to be involved in politics and meet some old stuck up, some old fogey congressman? So they since I was one of the newer members, I did what I was told, and we met Ron Dellums and took him on a tour of the school. And I remember saying to myself, this dude is cool. And he is handsome and was wearing kind of like a matching corduroy jacket with pants, and everybody was looking up to him. He was joking, he was relatable, so I was enjoying myself. And then we took him where he was going to give his speech, and I would usually sit in the back row at the church so I could sneak out. But since I was, no, the true story, but since I was on the escort committee, and I have a picture somewhere, dang, of that he eventually signed for me, but I have a photograph of him and the four other people that were on the escort committee. So I take him, which means, into the church, which means I got to sit in the second row.
That's
And
right.
so I sit up there wanting to just, oh God, I wonder how long is this guy going to speak? I want to get out. And I mean, within, to be honest, within 8 to 10 minutes, he spoke about civil rights and human rights and equality and the kinds of things that we could do if we come together, if you judge people based on their deeds and their actions and not the color of their skin or whatever. Anyway, I had, you know, give up. And I'm Mr. Cool, right? I'm like super cool. But this changed everything. Within 10 minutes, I remember turning to my fraternity brothers and saying, that's what I'm going to do. I am going to be a public servant. That is the moment in my senior year, second semester, when I determined that I was going to be a public servant. So that's when my life changed. And when I became Speaker of the California State Assembly, staff members, unbeknownst to me, contacted Ron Dellum. And when I was actually voted Speaker, he was in the audience.
Oh, wow.
And he cried. Oh my God, you're making me emotional. He sat in the front of the maybe 3 rows in the assembly floor, and he cried.
He was a wonderful man. At about the same time you were encountering him,
Yeah.
I was president for a while of the state Young Democrats, and he was our featured speaker. And
Oh God, he was phenomenal.
sat right next to him. I know exactly what you mean. The wonderful, and later became mayor of Oakland after being powerful chair. He actually was basically recruited to take that position.
He hated it.
And
he hated it.
he had been the very senior member of Armed
Yes.
Services.
Yes.
A man of enormous talent. You come out here, and there's a well-known story of where you decide, this is now a few years later, you've been out here for a while, but you're interested in politics. You decide one way to get involved, and you've been told or been suggested, help out in the campaign. You were on your way to Julian Dixon's office. This would have been later in '78, and you made a turn and wound up in Nate's office.
No, I don't think it was 78. I think it was, I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was closer. God, I'm trying to remember. But anyway,
Yvonne had
I
moved, Yvonne had vacated.
Yvonne had just,
For Yvonne's seat, it was Dave Cunningham, Nate Holden, Julian Dixon, and as I understand the story, you wound, at least you're the one to verify it or not. You wound up in Nate's,
yeah,
and and
I
the
was,
and meanwhile the assembly race, you had Marguerite Archie Hudson, Gwen Moore, and
yeah,
Edwards.
and
And
I'll never forget Elvin Moon, because it was the first time I ever met somebody whose last name was Moon. And he and I became good friends. Hell, you're friends with Elvin, I'm sure, because he became a very active party member for a while.
very active guy, man. And
And then there was a Republican that was ran, Jordan Daniels,
that's
but there was so much going. Diane Watson was running against somebody from Culver City, but the way it happened, I worked at a place in Huntington Park.
okay.
Okay. And the guy, and everybody knew I wanted to get involved in government.
What were you? What was your line of work in Huntington Park? What kind of job was it, Mr. Wesson?
I worked for a finance company.
All right.
Okay. And they tell me about that. The guy says, my wife says there's a guy, damn, Herbert can't remember his name, but he's a good guy, she says, and he's running for Congress, and his office is on Crenshaw Boulevard. You know where Crenshaw Boulevard is? Yeah, I know where Crenshaw Boulevard is. So what you do is you go to and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here. You go and you get off at Slauson, and then you go west to Crenshaw, and you make a right turn.
All right.
Okay, so I'm relatively new. I'm still, hell, to this day, I screw up on the freeway. So I passed the Slauson exit, and then I said, oh, I passed the Slauson exit, and I get off at the next exit, and I said, well, that's no big deal. I'm going to go west, like he said. So I go west, and instead of making a right turn, I make a left. And then I see this giant sign. Nate had a Senator Nate Holden for Congress sign painted on the bricks of what used to be a barbecue joint.
Right.
And I said, oh, that must be it. So I go in, volunteer. Within like 2 weeks, I'm the unofficial office manager.
All right.
And I reconnect with the guy that told me, and I say, hey man, this Nate Holden is really a nice guy. Would you thank your wife for me? And he said, oh hell, you're supposed to be in Julian Dixon's office. So that's the story.
and then a few years pass, and so that campaign and Mr. Dixon, Assemblyman Dixon, wins the seat, as I recall, with the all-out support of Howard Berman, among others, and Julian wins the congressional seat.
Yes.
Nate has, meaning Councilman Holden, is now no longer state senator because his seat was up. Dave Cunningham was in the race, and I recall you telling a story. I was in the room when you told at Councilman Dave Cunningham's funeral. You told the story of a debate you were in.
Yeah, how can I believe? And I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't have had these wonderful moments and experiences if it wasn't for Nate Holden. But who sends an inexperienced know nothing about policy guy to debate a city council member. You're talking about, I think that affected me. All of the where I hated debates based on that.
Cunningham
I
was a lot.
remember wrestling with Dave over the microphone. I mean, and he was big, strong. I'm back then probably 123 pounds,
Five foot
soaking wet.
five.
Oh my God. And thank God, and God rest his soul, that he became one of my dear friends and one of my biggest supporters, Dave Cunningham. But it was so funny. He had the mic and he'd move his arms and kind of my whole body.
Yeah. And as you told the story at the funeral, he said at the end of the debate, "Hey, young man, you're going to do just fine. You can take a punch."
Yeah.
and he was not only a council member, he was widely known in City Hall when he was there as um, working with Council Member Pat Russell, as basically Tom Bradley's man on the council. He was the enforcer. He was the whip.
Yeah.
He was the
Yep.
what you got to have. You got to have that number two coming in, backing up the play of the council of the in those days the council
And he
president.
was smarter than heck, and he was loyal. And then he gave it when he gave his word, it was his bond. But that's how the two of us met. And I think that debate traumatized me, and one of the reasons why I never became a great debater.
Well, you seem to do fine in debate, but but then you're a few years later. As, by now, you're well acquainted with Mr. Holden.
Yep.
I'm going to use his title at the time, former Senator Nate Holden. And in something I said earlier in passing, one of the great upsets was his council race some years later, where he won Dave Cunningham. Dave Cunningham had stepped down from the council, resigned from the council in a special election. Uh, uh, Nate Holden won the seat in a tremendous upset. As I recall,
Yep.
the runoff he beat Mr. Homer Broom, and
Yes.
you also had Mrs. Evers in the race.
Yeah, Murley. It was
Primary.
Barbara Boudreaux. It was a bunch of Geneva Cox. It was a bunch of very good people that I had a chance to meet, and we were fortunate enough to. Did Nate? I think Nate came in first in the runoff. But see, everybody thought it was an upset other than us.
Right.
You know, Councilman Holden had was one of the greatest campaigners
Right.
that I've ever seen.
Right.
I don't even believe that he could be a vampire. He doesn't sleep. You know, he would not miss an event. And the people in the streets really knew Nate. So we felt if we just did the things that we needed to do, that we had a good chance
Were you
of
running?
winning.
Did you run the campaign?
Yes, I did. And basically, he ran it through me. He taught me everything that I know. I will always be grateful that he felt I could handle all of that responsibility, and that's when my life began to change. Yes.
And you became his chief of staff in City Hall. And as I recall, you were
Yes. You know how that happened? He was we were in front. We were at a church where there was a group that I'm sure you've heard of. It was the Baptist Ministers conference or something it was called, and back then it was really a formal meeting, and Nate got up, and I didn't think he was going to mention me, and he says, and I want all of you to know that this guy is going to be my top pick. and then and then I go home and I say to my wife, what the hell do you think a top pick? Well, anyway, we figured out that we think a top hit is the chief of staff. And at that point, I would have been happy to do anything. But that's the first inkling that I got that he was going to make me his number one.
We'll take a thank you, and we'll take a short break and be back in just a moment. It's Rick Tuttle. We're back again here at the captain's table. It's my pleasure to be interviewing a former Los Angeles City Council President, Mr. Herb Wesson, also former Assembly Speaker. Unique in California, history of California politics, to be both the Speaker of the Assembly and also to be President of the Los Angeles City Council. Or to put it more specifically, Speaker of the State Assembly of the largest state in the United States of America, and President of the City Council, the second largest city in the United States of America. Positions of peer group, where the peer group does the picking and the selection. And moving ahead, upon being Chief of Staff to Mr. Holden, as I recall the story, you then took some time away from Mr. Holden's office and helped Yvonne Brathwaite Burke. Yvonne Burke become elected to the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors in the Battle of the Giants. As I recall, that was a battle Yvonne was able to win. How did she win it?
Well, I've just got to quickly say this, and I know we're pressed maybe for time, but I was there with Nate and present during the Donald Trump meetings. And so if Nate says he was on a helicopter with Trump, odds are he was. And I just tell you, it just shows how people change and how things change. Donald Trump sat in my office. I'm just the chief of staff, and we talked football. He liked the Rams quarterback, who was a guy named Tom Everett. Now, how could you just remember that. So anyway, I just had to throw that in. But I get a call from Nate saying, yeah, Yvonne Burke is going to run for the Board of Supervisors. And a lot of people thought that maybe Nate was going to do it. And Nate said, and I told her that I would support her and that you would manage her, or you would do the day-to-day operation for her campaign. And I'm like, hey, man, what do you mean? Me? Yeah, so I was volunteered.
Yeah, I get that.
Best thing that ever happened to me. But it was not my idea. It was Councilman Holden.
It was with Senator Diane Watson, and with, again, she has so many titles, but former Congress member Yvonne Burke, who had also been appointed to the supervisors. Now coming back to run for that, it was quite a battle.
Yeah.
That a couple of years later, we have your first race. As I remember, for the state assembly, where you're running in your own right. And as I recall, Joey Hill was seen as a formidable candidate. He was the son-in-law of
Senator Teresa Hughes. He's very bright, was very formidable. She was able to help him acquire a nice war chest. He worked for my dear friend Kevin Murray, who was the senator at that time, and he was
running for Senate.
Yeah, he was running. Kevin was running. You're right. He was the assembly person, and this is awful. But you want to know the truth? I have to tell you. he, and again, he's my good friend, but it was Saturday at the Bonaventure, I believe. It would have the county Democratic Party is meeting to do the endorsements.
Right.
I think we were at the Bonaventure, right? It's got to be. And our dear buddy, Ed Johnson,
Right.
my big supporter, gets to the vote 5 minutes late.
Oh my.
Wait, my opponent gets the endorsement. See, I was just trying to block it because,
Right.
like you said, he gets the endorsement by one vote. Had Ed been there 5, 10 minutes earlier, Ed would have been able to block it. So I think I probably almost killed Ed Johnson on Figueroa. You know, I probably chased him to the Harbor Freeway. Oh,
How?
and you know John Frierson, right?
Sure.
Oh, I literally thought John Frierson, who was my whip, you
Right.
know, I really thought he was going to take his tie off and hang
And
Ed.
John was a
That,
boxer. John was a boxer. Yeah.
yeah, he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
John Myers was later on the boxing commission, and they. So how did you win it? How did you win these?
Well, let me just say this, because you made me think of something I'd forgotten. I put John Frierson on the boxing commission. That was one of my favorite appointments because that was a dream that he had in his whole life.
I know
And
him pretty well. He loved it.
yeah, he did. And I think the reason why we won the campaign is we started a little earlier and we were more aggressive where it related to contacting the constituents. And I had a secret weapon.
All
And
right.
my secret weapon was that I had coached in the city of Culver City for 13 years.
Pop Warner football.
Pop Warner football. And Culver City was the region that put me over the top.
I got it. And it's interesting. It was also the region that put Gwen Moore over the top in her race in 78 with Marguerite Archie Hudson, later assembly member, and Mr. Willis Edwards. It's Culver City came through. Then you go to Sacramento.
But I tell you something real quick. Well, we we put together, in fact, it wasn't even my consultant. It was just something that the in-house staff did. It was very shoddy work. We put together a flyer that said Herb Wesson is from, lives Culver City, blah, blah, blah. Photographs of my kids in Culver City uniforms and this, that, and the other. And we passed it out at Vets Auditorium to get the support of the Culver City Democratic Club. I didn't think that much of it, Rick, but about a week later, Joey's team came back with this piece that said, I go to work in Culver City every day. So then we knew we hit a nerve. We
Right.
we knew something had happened, that there was some movement. So Culver City did it, and I want to give them credit for that.
And Rebecca and I happen to be living right here in Culver City right now, as a matter of fact. So then you go to Sacramento and walk us through this. How you become Speaker of the State Assembly, but let's begin with your committee assignments when you arrive. The Speaker at the time is
Antonio Villaraigosa.
I thought
My
so.
dear, my dear buddy.
Point you to the X committee, which is
The GO committee. When I got there, see, I was fortunate. We had a June primary and I won. So the average person would stop campaigning because, November, 87% of the people were Democrats, but I didn't. I would fly up to Sacramento right after my election. I'd stay 1 or 2 days every week, got to know everybody. And so then I found out the lay of the land. They said, these are the various committees, these are the gigs within. You can be a caucus chair or majority leader, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? I want to have my own thing. And so it was recommended that I be the chair of GO. GO was a committee that the Republicans and the Democrats needed. It was a committee where the Republicans and the Democrats, they would vote together. It was not like 8-7 votes and things of that nature. But everybody wanted, not everybody, but being the chair of GO was desirable to a lot of members. So what I told my dear friend, Antonio Villaraigosa, after I had shown all of the existing members that I had an ability to raise money.
right.
And I think out of all of the Democrats, the folks already elected, I was like the fourth or fifth highest earner, right?
Right.
So I went to him and said, I want to be the chair of energy.
Right.
What was it? Energy and environment. And he was like, oh, no, I can't give him that. And I said, no, you got to take care of me. I want to. And so at the end of the day, I got a word to him that I would accept begrudgingly government organization. And he gave it to me. And that was the committee I wanted all the time. And I used to joke with people and say, I am the chair of sin. I've got booze. I've got wine. I've got gambling. I got horse racing. I got tobacco. Ta-da! And it was a great committee. And that's where I developed relationships with the Republican members. And they were the first group on board when I determined that I would like to be the speaker. They were all, they came to me and said, hey, can you do it quicker? We're ready. And I'd have to say, hold your horses.
As I recall, it had been Antonio, then Bob Hertzberg, and then you. And as
Yes.
the general impression that year, it was going to be wide open. And next thing you know, bam, you lock it up. As I understand it, for example, am I right? Darrell Steinberg took a look at it and decided.
Darrell Steinberg, Tom Calderon, and Sarah Reyes. It was kind of like when I was young, I think people supported me because they knew I was going to be working for them. It was not about the title. It was about, it put me in a position to do the work. And I pride myself on being a members speaker and a members president because I always try to make sure that the members got what they needed. Maybe not everything they wanted. And quickly, we were able to put it together. Yes.
Speaking
It
of
was my greatest honor to have been elected speaker and to be elected president. To be elected by your peers twice is just unbelievable. My mom and dad and grandparents were smiling down from heaven.
How did you become president of the Los Angeles City Council? You had your term limited out. You became a member of the city council upon Mr. Ludlow departing. And you, as I recall, you pretty much cleared the field of serious opponents for the council race.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
4 or 5 years later, became council president. How did that work out?
It was, in fact, I think you just made me think about another dear friend, Tom Labange. When that was being put together, Tom Labange says to me, "Who else but you?" And I kind of think that a lot of members felt that way.
All right.
I work closely with everybody. I have relationships with everyone. Eric was the president at the time, former Mayor Garcetti. He and I have always been the best of friends. It was an honor to be the president of the council while he was mayor. I had Antonio for 1 year and Eric for 7. And I don't remember anybody else trying to be the president.
That's from memory. It's my impression. How would you compare the two positions, compare and contrast to be Speaker of the Assembly, and talk about leadership kind of thing now, and President of the City Council? How is it similar, and what are the differences?
Well, it is similar in that when you are the quote unquote leader, right? That's all you get is that title. But your job is to work for the other members. So that's the same in the assembly, and that's the same in the council. You put the constituents first, members second, and you're last on that totem pole. What was really different for me, and why, if I had to say which one I like the best, it's the council, because you're at home, you're in your district, and you can usually see some of your accomplishments. In the state, you might pass some great legislation, which we were fortunate to do, and built veteran homes and survived an unbelievable budget deficit. But when you're here, you can see the buildings that you build, and you can see, your stop signs and the park improvements and the programs that you put in place. So I would just say, if that leadership is the same, regardless if you're the leadership of Chrysler or the leadership of the LA Dodgers. But the difference with that is the what you have to do for the members.
Thank you. I want to ask 5 or 6 questions briefly. You're not confined to being brief. I'll be brief in the questions. These will not be necessarily connected, Mr. Wesson, but they will.
And I did not like flying, so the council won out.
Oh, yes.
I didn't like playing.
I hear that. Uh, what's your sense of the present council? And I believe you were deeply involved. I happen to be involved too in the election of Mr. Marquis Harris Dawson in the first place. What's your sense of his prospects? What's your sense of the current city council? And before I do that, tell us what you're doing these days professionally.
Okay, quickly, I am a consultant for Mercury Public Affairs. We have clients throughout this country and abroad. But getting back to Marquis, and I, as long as I'm face to face with people, then I'm a happy camper. This is a new chapter in my life. Never done it before, so I'm learning as I go. But I'll never forget when I was first elected president of the city council, and I was at one of the churches, and somebody asked me a question about being the first African American elected to be president of the council. And I remembered, and I've told this to Marquis, I remember saying to the crowd or whoever asked me the question, I said, the best thing about being the first is knowing that you will not be the last. Right. So this council is, I think, very talented. A lot of them come from different backgrounds. They're not your classic, This guy was chief of staff to her, and so they come from different backgrounds. Some of them have activism backgrounds. Marquise comes from an activist background. I think that, and it's probably true all the time, but more so here. I think he's for the right man for the job at the right time. I can't think of anybody more perfect than he. He is respectful, he's smart, he will listen, and he understands trying to bring people together. So I'm excited, and I was very supportive. I'm excited about the future, not just with him, but I believe we're really going to see some of these other council members, their wings sprout, and they're going to take flight.
Thank you, council member. What is your assessment of the mayor, Karen Bass, and how's she doing?
She's been my friend for 100 years. I think that she is the right person for this time of change. And I do want to say this. People may look at this the wrong way. I see it totally different. This is the first time in the history of the city of Los Angeles where you have a mayor and a council president that can close the door in a room, cuss each other out, beat each other to death, and come out of that room smiling because of the history. And I think that's a good thing when they have conversations when one can say to the other, I think that's dumb, and don't have to worry about how they feel. Another person says, no, it's not. I think we're going to get the kind of real conversations that only two people that really care about each other can have. So I see endless possibilities.
And they both come out of Community Coalition, which Ms.
Yeah.
Bass established and founded. And one or two last questions. We have a governor's race coming up, and Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa has entered the race, as I indicated earlier. I'm supporting him.
I will too. He and I just haven't chatted yet. You never count him out. He is a good public servant. He's a man that will work until he drops. He's very experienced. I know I would not want to run against him. I think he's going to be formidable.
And it's been a pleasure to have former speaker, former council president, Mr. Herb Wesson. Would you like to say anything before we close up the show? Anything you want to mention or anything you think needs to be said? The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Rick, it was a pleasure to see you again, even though this is over Zoom. It was a pleasure. I want to thank Tom Kaptain, a dear friend for many, many decades. And I want to, if anybody is listening to me, I want to thank you for allowing me to serve as your assembly person. I want to thank you for allowing me to serve as your council person. I love this new chapter of my life because I get to spend more time with my wife, my kids, my grandkids. But for over 30 years, I was afforded the opportunity to go to a job that I loved, not liked, loved. And I think that is a rarity. And I want to just thank Los Angelinos, Culver City Heights, people from the county unincorporated area, people that taught me how to do this job. I want to thank you for allowing me to do it, and I'll see you around.
It's great speaking with you. And on behalf of Mr. Tom Kaptain and the Captain's Table, here with our distinguished guest, former Los Angeles City Council President Herb Wesson, I'm Rick Tuttle, and we are signing off. Thank you very much.